wanted to start today just with, I suppose, a little bit of an apology because I am guessing that an awful lot of the talks that we're hearing at the moment are reflecting on the last 18 months and what there is to learn. And I'm afraid it's going to be another one of those a little bit, but very much from the perspective that over the last 18 months, it's been a great opportunity just to have a bit of a sit back and look at everything that's going on and think about what is this telling us about the way that we're working and how can we maybe look at things a little bit differently. And so I'm going to give you a couple of things in terms of how to maybe reframe some of the things that we're looking at and the way in which we're working and the things that we're trying to achieve. And then also some little tips in terms of how you can actually do that practically. And we're going to have a Q&A at the end as well. So to start off with, I wanted to pose this question like the "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" saying, which is good proper British saying, which I would subscribe to that. I think if you've got something that's working really well and you know that it's not causing any problems, then why change it? But at the same time, I actually think that what we've seen over the course of the last 18 months really is very much a reflection of the fact that we didn't know whether or not something was broken in the first place. And, as we've faced the challenges over the course of the pandemic and much more of what else was going on, we've maybe began to realize that there are some things that we could be doing a little bit better, some things that didn't work as well as we wanted them to. And yeah, that's really what this is all about. So as we look at the list of stuff that's been going on over the course of the last 18 months, there's actually a huge amount happening. And really it breaks down into political uncertainty with Brexit, which we knew we'd be dealing with that in Europe. We've also then got the huge economic uncertainty and the huge amount of strain that's been put on us in terms of the pandemic and dealing with that. But there's also a really interesting thing happening culturally as well, as we're beginning to see more millennials, for want of a better word, kind of moving into the workforce. And we're starting to see a change of dialogue in terms of people wanting to talk about some of the cultural issues and the social issues that are happening. And so topics around racial equality and sexual harassment and all of those kinds of things that are starting to show that sign. And wherever we are on the debate in those things, the one thing that's for certain is that we will be seeing a workforce where people want to know who they work for, and they want to know that there is at least some level of kind of commonality between how they feel and what they believe and the people that they're working for and what they believe. And so more than ever, we're seeing organizations where they are actively encouraging conversations that maybe 10 years ago you wouldn't have gone anywhere near at all within an organization, and it would have been seen as just a little bit odd to kind of go there. Now there's an awful lot of dialogue. So we've got a whole bunch of different changes happening politically, economically, culturally, all at the same time. And not all of this is going to just disappear over the course of the coming years. There are things that we're going to have to continue to work our way through. So as we do that, one of the things, as I was saying at the top, that I wanted to do is just look at everything that's going on across the board and some of the phrases that we band about within learning, some of which we stigmatize and we say, that's not a very good way to do things, or some of which are very trendy and fashionable. And we know that within learning, every year there's a new thing that we kind of want to talk about, or that we're sharing at conferences. And it feels like with all of that stuff going on, it can get a little bit lost, I suppose, knowing what matters and how this all fits together. And really, that's what I wanted to start with, is just some reflections on exactly that topic. How does all of this fit together? And maybe provide a slightly different way of looking at how we can understand the kind of learning that's going on within our organization. And when I say learning, really what we're talking about there is knowledge sharing. How do people find solutions and find the information that they need to get around a problem and carry something out? So I wanted to introduce you to a couple of concepts that have been occupying my mind quite a lot for the last 4 months. And really what I've done here is I've taken all of these different activities and all these different phrases, and I've banded them and I've put them onto a bit of a chart. And the two key indexes that I've used are how prescriptive something is and how endorsed something is. And obviously you could take this and you could do it against all kinds of different attributes, but over the last few months, as I say, I've been starting to recognize that these things are really important. So prescriptive is the one that I tried to think of a better word for and struggled with. And I'm afraid I left it at prescriptive. What I'm talking about there is how structured something is. And we with traditional training, you've got this concept of someone starts with a given need. You're pretty sure that they're going to have no knowledge or little knowledge on something. You're going to go through a whole series of it might be videos, PDFs, or whatever else it could be. It could be an e-learning module where everything's in it. You're going to do an assessment at the end. You could have a face-to-face event in there somewhere. That's a typical blended learning piece of training. And off the back of that, you're going to assume that someone is going to be well armed to know everything that they need to know on a given topic. So that's the most prescriptive kind of learning. And then at the other end, you've got stuff that happens all the time, every day, where someone says, I've got something and I don't know how to deal with it. Where can I go to find that knowledge? So this is, maybe there's someone in your team who has just had a bereavement, or maybe there's a technological hurdle, something that you're going to have to deal with that you've never dealt with before. How are we going to actually help people to get through that so that they can carry out the task that's in front of them, whatever that might be. So you've got most prescriptive, least prescriptive, and then endorsed is all about how official something is, how regulated we feel it is, and how much we're happy to kind of put our brand on it and say this is something that we're responsible for. And with all of that kind of stuff, what you tend to find is there is a little bit of a relationship. In order for us to feel comfortable about making something more endorsed or more official, then we feel like we want it to be a little bit more prescriptive. Because if it's prescriptive, then it's a known quantity. And at that point, we feel like, okay, I'm happy to put my name against this and say it's doing what I want it to do. In the background on this, you'll notice that we've also got a bit of a kind of a blue gradient, and that's just my way of representing what a central learning team has got visibility of within an organization. And typically what you'll find is that there's a little bit of a blind spot where we get to the top corner. And basically, anything that's going on day to day within a team, it gets a little bit difficult to know exactly how that knowledge is being shared, but also how effective that knowledge is as well, which is really critical. So looking at this traditionally, this kind of lens, and then thinking about, well, what is it that we try and do? What we generally see, especially when I kind of go back 9-10 years ago, is that there was generally an effort to move things down to the bottom left. So we've got various activities like mentoring and coaching, and goal setting, all those kinds of things that we might be able to make them more prescriptive and therefore feel more comfortable endorsing them. And it could be that we have a particular template that needs to be followed, or it has to be done at a particular time of the year, or it has to be done by a particular person, whatever else it could be. And so by doing that, where possible, we can kind of nudge things down into that bottom left-hand corner. Now, there's two problems with this. The first problem is that you add friction to all of your processes. And we all know this from working with organizations at different stages and different scales. The bigger that you get, the more regulation there is, the longer it takes to get something done. But of course, if you're pushing everything in and you say, well, we've got to do it in this way, then you're making, you're not necessarily making everyone's lives difficult, but you are adding friction to the process. And it might be that there are certain circumstances in which what you've said you want to do as a prescriptive solution doesn't actually meet what the business needs or an organization needs. The second thing, which I think is more important, and it actually is really much more visible when you kind of lay it out like this, is you can see a gap forms. And so we end up with a whole bunch of things that the organization wants to regulate and wants to endorse that happens maybe on a given system or whatever else it is, and we've brought that all into scope and we're saying, okay, we're happy to call that learning. And then you've got the knowledge sharing activities that happen up in the top right, and they kind of just get left where they are and sometimes kind of completely ignored. So you could have information being shared on, it'll be a communication tool typically. So maybe it's just Outlook, or maybe it's Slack, or wherever else it might be. But people are sharing this knowledge nonetheless, but they're just doing it in places where no one's got visibility of it and no one else can benefit from it. And so that's not ideal either. Now, what we're beginning to see over, I'd say the last 2 years or so, are organizations that are rethinking that, and really when you chew it over and you say, well, what are they doing there? What they're doing is they're trying to increase their visibility of what's going on across the whole organization. And rather than creating this gap, what they're doing is they're creating an environment and a culture in which all of that learning can be recognized, and we can understand the value of it, and we can then start to benefit from it, and we can understand how it helps an organization move forward. So actually, a lot of what we're talking about from here on is how do you spread that gradient, and how do you get better visibility of everything that's going on in an organization? And in order to answer that, I just wanted to kind of look at this little bit of this little statistic. I'm not the biggest fan of statistics, so I'm not going to hold this up and say this proves my point and it says exactly this. Like, you can tell different stories with statistics, so fair play on that one. But the key thing with this is I think it does tell us a little bit about the way in which learning was seen during the pandemic, and whether or not it was seen as a solution, quite critically. And what I mean by that is, if we're in a place where 30% of organizations put people within the learning team on furlough, and of those 56% put more than 75% of the team on furlough, that in and of itself may not look like a massive number, given everything else that was going on at the time. But that point in time is when an organization is facing a challenge. That organization is saying, we have really got to cut costs. We've got to be able to work with less. We've got to be able to get the same amount done and get through this time. And what this means is that those organizations didn't look to those learning teams as solution bringers. For whatever reason there might be, they didn't say those people are the ones who are going to help us adapt through this time of need. And that's something that I think we really need to question. And where it takes you to is to a place where we say, well, if we're focused on an organization's success and understanding whether or not we're going to be able to help power through and get the organization through this together, then what our measure of whether or not we're succeeding should be based upon whether or not the organization has succeeded. And so we start to get into a mindset where everything that we're doing should be success driven. And again, I'm not talking about anything revolutionary here. I know that there's an awful lot of people out there who are already doing this, but what they're doing in doing so is that they're kind of increasing that gradient, and I'll explain why. So if we start with a business goal or an organization goal, and we say we need to adapt to X, Y, or Z. So let's take the remote working example. Remote working is a goal, and being well adapted to it is something that would really help an organization to succeed. Okay, so what needs to be done within that? What objectives are there that we could find within it? Well, as a learning team, we would want to make sure that people are focused on and have the information that they need to be able to deal with technical hurdles that might be involved. We want to have mental health training that a lot of organizations did roll out. We'd want to be looking at whether or not people are feeling fatigued and whether or not there's too many meetings. Are people doing are following good etiquette in terms of how they're meeting together, and whether or not they're allowing enough time to get work done and all of that kind of stuff? Are people following good behavior in terms of logging off at the right times and letting work go at the end of the day? All of these things are different challenges in the scope and the sphere of remote working. So if I want to understand whether or not I'm delivering value for my organization, looking at whether or not I'm helping with those things is really a good way of doing it. And the great thing about looking at it in that way is we then get to understand whether or not stuff that maybe I haven't delivered myself, but has come from elsewhere in the organization, those things could be really helping me to meet those challenges. And so it becomes less about what I can produce and more about what I can enable and what I can have happening. So a couple of quick kind of bullet points there in terms of like healthy objectives, that they demonstrate impact, that they're responding to that learner need, they're easy to adapt, and that they encourage collaboration and knowledge sharing. And we're going to talk about all of that a little bit more just a little bit later on. So where do we start then in terms of how do we maybe change the way that we're working, and how do we get a little bit more focused on success metrics in that way? The first thing and the starting point for most of these conversations is around that prescription, and acknowledging that being prescriptive is not the same as being prepared. Now, what I mean by that is, if I've got some information security training, and that helps me, part of that is understanding what a VPN is and how I need to use that, and how I need to keep things safe when I'm working from home. That might all be wrapped up within a massive learning module, and it could be that that's 45 minutes worth of training. Now, if I'm an inductee and I'm starting afresh at a new organization, that could be exactly what I need. I'm going to start from the start, I'm going to go through to the end, and I'm going to come out and I'm going to know everything that I need to know, hopefully. However, 6 months down the road, we have a pandemic and we need to be able to get some specific answers, and we want to highlight some specific parts of that knowledge. We're then in a place where potentially the knowledge is the learning is a little bit too prescriptive, and we can't pull out particular parts of it and use it and make it available. So yeah, having a flexible approach to the way that we're sharing our knowledge, particularly, usually this is in terms of content, is very important. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in terms of how you can make your content a bit more flexible and how you can share your knowledge in a way that is useful for people at kind of both ends of the spectrum. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is really, a bit of a continuity. You've got people who might be accessing that knowledge for formal learning, very mandatory training, ticking the box, all of that kind of stuff. But then you might have people that are just needing it for coaching, or maybe people who are looking to get an answer to a particular point of need. Maybe someone's got a problem with a piece of equipment or something like that. How can they get help? And so, yeah, the being flexible is really the point that I'm trying to get across here. Okay, the second thing is we talked about our objectives and how we select those and how do we move forward with them. Now, it's a bit chicken and egg here, and there's a really difficult decision to be made about when do you start talking about a given concept? When do you start addressing a need that you believe is there? Because sometimes you're going to feel it and you're going to say, right, this is definitely something that we need to get addressed, and we need to start sharing information on this as quickly as possible. And that can be completely valid. Often, though, it's best if you can start by getting a little bit of a measure of where you're at, like a control, and say, when we started this, I was able to see these data points. We'll talk about data in just a little bit, but this is where I think we started, and this is where I think we ended. And the reason why that's important is it gives you an idea of your success and whether or not you're actually having an impact, and whether you're actually delivering something that's giving the result that you're after. But the other thing is it helps you to understand whether or not your approach is correct in the first place. And that's a really important point to consider, which is we might think that we understand where there might be a knowledge gap within the organization. But if we jump straight into that, we might be at risk of creating a load of campaigns or whatever other learning material it is that is really focused on stuff that people are already comfortable with, in which case we're not actually benefiting things that much. So as I say, we'll talk about how we get into actually measuring this a little bit later on, but it's often an important thing to question, how far do I need to go in terms of establishing my baseline before I get into anything too significant? Now, beyond that structure, so we talked earlier on about prescriptive versus non-prescriptive, and you've got an option. You could create a load of content and say, well, here's training, and this is for inductees, and then I've got some more bite-sized content which is going to be relevant for people who need it, and I may be asking some questions, and you could respond in that way in order to in order to meet an organizational challenge. However, the downside of doing it that way is it does cause extra work. So it means that you're going to be creating content once, and then you're going to be creating it again effectively. And again, it's all about, we come back to the thing, but it's all about you publishing something. It's all about you actually creating and producing something. Whereas we're going to see in a minute, that might not be the best thing. So having a structure that allows you to be a little bit more bite-sized and put things across in a way that can be accessed in a start here, end there type approach, that's one element, but also allowing people to access that content as they want to and just dip in is really important. And there's a whole load of tools out there that will allow you to create content in that kind of bite-sized structure and put that stuff over into kind of like a pathway, or maybe it's a course that you've got open access to. People are able to kind of dip in where they want to. But yeah, the key thing. The key thing with all of that is that you're creating a structure that is flexible and that you can easily adapt later on. And the bottom point there is really important. You might create something that you think is perfect and you've put hours and hours and hours and hours into, but then if you're working in a way that you're actually looking at the organization's needs, exploring whether or not it's having the right impact, you might find that hasn't worked at all. It might be that you've got some information about mental health and where people can seek help. And maybe that's a PDF, and the information that you've got is below the screen, so people have to scroll down to access it. And you find actually, as a result of that, no one's aware, no one's seen that information that's really important about that whole learning piece. And so what you might find you then need to do is to just completely replace it and say, I'm going to get rid of that PDF and I'm going to replace it with a video, and I want to be able to just drop that in. And so again, by having that flexible learning approach, you're in a place then when you've not had to completely eliminate everything that you've built. You're just replacing one element that's maybe not working so well. So that's really important. And then the final thing here is just around encouraging conversation. And we're going to touch on this a little bit more over the course of the next couple of slides, but that conversation is really important in terms of getting feedback and understanding exactly how people are receiving what you're talking about. So as I say, we'll touch on that in just a moment. Okay, so the next area is all around building community, and this is really where it gets quite exciting, because communities are a key way in which you can spread that gradient that we were talking about earlier on. So if you've got a whole area of the organization that's learning things on the job from a particular source, that might be an expert, as I've got on the second bullet point there. It might be that they're all going to a particular website. It could be a number of different things. If we're providing a format in which people can share those things and actually allow you to provide them with a little bit of a stage and put the spotlight on them, even if it's just for a little while, that could be really beneficial to other areas of your organization. And it could be that you're finding the information that's being shared in one part of an organization is really helping another part of the organization to succeed in a challenge that they might have. And so that element of community and understanding, is there something valuable here that we can share and we can get other people to be aware of, is much benefited through having these kinds of communities. Now, the second two bullet points there, 3 and 4, so collective interest and organic company culture. This is something that I talk about quite a lot and people get a bit bored of. Over the course of the last 10 years, we've had platforms where we can create communities and we can talk about, I've got a community for, maybe it's mental health, and this is where I want you to go and talk about mental health or whatever else it could be. Okay, that's a very good thing, because it means that people have got somewhere to go and they can start to talk about topics that might be important to them. But the downside of it is it does require you to be ahead of the game. You need to know what topics people are going to want to talk about before they want to talk about them. And if you're not ahead of the game, then they will form those communities elsewhere on other systems and in emails and all the rest of it. So if you're wanting to create a hub where people can share explore topics that are becoming relevant to them and find solutions to things that are becoming pain points, then it's really important to allow that kind of organic growth through just content tagging and knowing this content is about a given topic, and also having systems that really encourage discovery. Those are a great way of putting things in front of people and saying, look, we think you're in this bracket. These are all things that your colleagues are looking at. You should go and have a look at that stuff too. And then what you're getting into then is allowing people to create their own communities around the knowledge that you're sharing on a given platform or tool, or whatever else it might be. So that's a really important way in which you can start to find out what topics people are spending a lot of time talking about, but also getting people able to share their knowledge in a way that you might not have been able to otherwise. The final point there on campaigns I've left till last because it's so important. We all run campaigns in one way or another. Even going right the way back to the earlier systems that I worked on, people were wanting to put big graphics on the front page to talk about something for a given period of time. There's a couple of things there that are really important, and again I think we'll touch on them in just a second. But we need to sorry, I've just stumbled for a second. We need to make sure that we are enabling conversations around campaigns. So a campaign shouldn't just be something that we're running for a period of time because we're running it. There needs to be a social interaction there. So commenting is really important on that. And if you've got systems that allow you to do it, user-generated content is hugely important there as well, because again, it brings up this element of there's some pocket of success in a part of the organization where they're learning to deal with a particular challenge, and we can then maybe highlight that as part of a campaign and say, look, this is something that's come from over here, but it's actually really good, and it's something that we think that you should check out. So a campaign is good, but a social campaign around community is even better for that reason. Okay, so measuring impact. We have a number of ways in which we look at data, but so the two key camps of data collection would be quantitative and qualitative, and that means quantitative data is things like content engagements. How many people are liking my content or viewing my content, or how long are they spending? Whereas qualitative would be, I've had a sit-down conversation with someone to find out whether or not they've got the answers that they need on a given topic, whether they feel like they would like to, whether they feel like they would be able to deal with a particular challenge or whatever else it might be. So we've got a natural disposition to quantitative data, and that's because generally we're thinking about how can we prove that we've done what we wanted to do? And a number, tally or a count, is something that's very attractive in that regard, because we can put it on a dashboard and we can say, right, okay, look, I've got a line going up, therefore I must be doing exactly what I set out to do. Qualitative data can be a little bit less exciting in that regard, because it's harder to put down sentiment and make that visible through a dashboard, or whatever it is that we're looking at for our reporting. Now, all of that being said, I would kind of suggest that we need to turn that on its head a little bit, really. If we're talking about collecting data in order to understand whether or not something is working, that's really only the first part. Our outcome of all of this, remember, is whether or not the organization is succeeding at the goal that it had. So is it managing to continue with less staff while we've got temporary furlough, or is it that we've not had any security incidents while everyone's working from home, or whatever else it could be? Those are the ways in which we should be measuring our success, is if we've positively influenced those things that an organization felt it was going to be challenged by. And so those goals are the things that we ultimately look to, and our objectives should be telling us whether or not we feel like we are making a positive impact there. Are we actually getting to a place that people are comfortable with some of the things that they're going to be facing over the course of the next few months, whatever else it is? So a few key things to say on that. Content engagements can be really valuable, but don't get too carried away with them. So looking at views, looking at number of likes, it tells you that people are hitting a piece of content, tells you that people are maybe thinking about it and spending long enough to be on there to hit the like button. But beyond that, you don't get any kind of outcome from it. You don't know what people are thinking or what questions people have still got to ask themselves. So a second part of that then is around surveying. And if you're setting out very early doors, surveying can be a key way to get an understanding of the sentiment and get a picture of what people are doing and how they're doing it, and where they feel like they need the most support as well, which is critically important. And then at the bottom there, in terms of responding, encourage that conversation, encourage people to comment, encourage people to share user-generated content if you can, because that's the way in which you'll get a very natural flow and understand if there is a sentiment that's positive or negative, whether people feel like they're understanding or not, without you having to do a survey, without you having to go out there. You can just kind of see that information flowing in. And so that can be a really beneficial thing and a very good way of understanding whether or not you're succeeding. Okay, so I've talked an awful lot there. So hopefully some of that has made some sense. There's a whole load of concepts there in terms of social learning and gathering data and being very responsive to how your organizations work and campaigns and all that kind of stuff. Ultimately, what I would say is, here at Thrive, that's our methodology, that's our mindset. This is how we work. We're enabling learning teams to be very responsive to their organization's needs, and to hopefully demonstrate that they're making improvements and making an impact. So we have a learning experience platform that is built around all of that kind of stuff, and we also have off-the-shelf content which is designed very campaign focused and allows you to pull something into a given campaign that you might be running, but again, kind of really on the button in terms of the kinds of things that our customers are talking about and that they want more information about. So if there's anything that you've kind of heard that you've got yeah, you'd like to know a little bit more about and you'd like to know how we do something, please don't hesitate to get in touch. The contact details are on the page there. And yeah, I believe we've got a bit of a Q&A now, so hopefully I'll be able to answer any questions here as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Mark. We do have some questions, and I urge you that if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat and I will be able to let Mark know. Andrew's got a question. How do you make sure that communities don't die off?
Oh, that's a very good one. That touches on the thing I was getting really excited about earlier on. So I think when communities die off, it's because a given topic might be really important for an organization for a period of time. It might be that people need information about how to deal with I keep on talking about remote working. There's all kinds of other things it could be. Maybe there's some new technology being rolled out. Now, how does this work? Oh, now we can't do this, whatever else it might be. So those things might be a real hot burning issue for an organization for a period of time, but then they kind of naturally die off. If you're at the right, if you've got your communities at the right level and you're thinking about communities in terms of problems that people are trying to solve, then that's okay. It's okay for things to kind of ebb away, because what that means is that people have got no questions, and they're kind of, you've solved their problems, which is a good thing. The question then is, well, what other problems are emerging, and where do I need to kind of be maybe highlighting good practice and showing where we've got subject matter experts on particular things. So it's always then about looking for what the next area is and what we need to address within the organization. So I feel like maybe I've kind of not answered the question by answering it a different way, but yeah, it's recognizing that actually a community, sometimes, depending on the kind of community it is, it will just die off on its own, and then you've got to look at, well, where is the other need emerging?
So there's a follow on to that, which I'm going to jump to. That was Andrew's question, and Nicola has then sort of asked, what's in it for me, the positioning piece? People are time poor, participants, and contributing to a community. Do you have a point about that?
Yeah, people are helping each other all the time. We I'm so at Thrive we work with customers who enable user generated content and don't enable user generated content, and it's a debate, and there's valid reasons on both sides. But I think one thing that we should all be clear on is user generated content is happening whether we kind of bring it into a system or not, and it's being shared in different ways. And there's always experts within different areas of the organization who are helping people and being, that network hub where if you've got a question, oh, think about asking that person, because they'll be able to help you get to an answer. So I think, like, what's in it for me, that's almost just part of how people work. If we're supporting them to get their tasks done and the things that they're trying to achieve, then actually we don't need to kind of oversell the community aspect of it. We can just encourage them to support one another in the way that actually, a positive workplace, you do support one another. So I think, again, it's about whether or not is there too much friction there? Is it that, there are ways that you can contribute, but it's just a little bit too difficult at the moment, or it's easier to go somewhere else and share it somewhere else? I think those are the questions that I would be asking, rather than like, does someone want to help? Because actually people are generally wanting to help one another.
So Sarah's asking, have you seen communities of practice used as a mechanism to support building communities to aid campaigns?
That's a very good question as well. I'm trying to think. There's a couple of examples. So we work with Decium, who I think, last time I was asked a similar question. I highlighted Decium as well, and then stakeholders from Decium were on the call, so I was like, hello. But yeah, so with Decium and the examples I'm thinking of, they've ran campaigns around some of these more cultural things, the equality questions that are coming up, and those debates that are being held. And it's, if you're bold enough to talk about some of those things in a campaign, there can be, it can be quite divisive if it's done wrong, and it can be that you really need to moderate it. So you have to gauge that, and you have to know where you're at as an organization. But it can be a really positive thing to talk about something that maybe is becoming a little bit of a cloud, like people don't know how everyone else feels about it, and so you can bring something out and air it. and it then deals with a whole load of kind of unknowns, and definitely where we've seen those kinds of campaigns running, you often see communities forming off the back of that, because people realize that they've got others to connect to that maybe they weren't aware of, before, and that they actually want to do something about that particular topic. So that's the best kind of campaign. It's also the most edgy.
Yes, yes, no, definitely. Lizzie's asked, what do you think are the most important elements of successfully encouraging social and peer learning in a hybrid working environment?
So I would say probably one of the key things is, I mentioned earlier on about goals and an organization having goals. And I do think that it's important for a wider team to be aware of the challenges that they're working towards facing, because it then helps in two ways. As you've got, your different areas that you're focusing on, it might be that you're doing campaigns, it might be that you're just promoting content to your front page in a different way. As you're doing those things, people then understand why you're doing it, because we're all going to muck in together and we're all going to help deal with the challenge. And I think that is probably one of the most important ways in which you can deal with that you were just talking about. Having people working well and collaborating well across the organization, whether they're remote working or whether they're in the office. That's one of the key ways of enabling that, is actually just getting people to form up and to galvanize around a particular point. And maybe that also goes back to the question we had about community and how you can encourage people to contribute to community as well. I think the other element of that is things like on our platform we have support for broadcasts, which is a way of kind of just similar to what we're doing now, sharing with lots of people in an organization, but also getting questions back in real time. That's a really good way of dealing with that, because you remove that whole element of, I've got a load of people in the room and then a load of people trying to hear what they're saying on a microphone or some, it kind of levels the playing field a little bit there. So that can be a good way to kind of moot and get a bit of a discussion going without disadvantaging anyone.
Definitely. Richard,
you can definitely do that on things like Zoom as well. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. Richard's asked, how do you get stakeholders on board to see an LXP as more than just a learning tool?
That's a really good one. And it's a good one because I could talk about it for hours. So for me, it comes back to that prescriptive thing. When you look at what most learning experience platforms are doing, there's a bit of a misnomer that it's just another kind of LMS. Learning management systems are very academically structured. You have a lot of learning in a very kind of linear format, and you say, well, I'm going to enroll you, so I'm going to decide whether or not you're allowed to do it, and then I'm going to give you access, and you're going to go through it in the order that I've said that you need to go through it. So it's a very prescriptive tool, and I come from an academic background, so I saw those tools being used with students, and there it makes sense. In a business, not so much, because you lose that flexibility in terms of being able to go, okay, but now someone has a question on one particular thing. Can they find that information? Can they get that knowledge that you need? You might have, tech support, I'm sure, had an absolutely awful time when the pandemic first hit and everyone was working remotely. Is it that I can give them some link to send out that actually answers the question that they're getting 90% of the time? So yeah, the way to look at it is to say, do we have a tool that enables us to work in a flexible way? And I went into this, I didn't want to get too salesy, but that's what I believe an LXP should be really doing for any organization, is giving you a more flexible approach so that you don't have to produce everything 3 times. You just produce it once, but then people can use it however they want to. And that's really the key thing.
Yeah, definitely. So Janice has asked, how do you create a community for a business division that refuses to change? An older regulatory business arm?
Oh, that could be very challenging. I do think so. I talked a little bit about how do you start out, and do you start out by collecting some information, and then later on I talked about kind of surveying and sitting down with people and getting that kind of qualitative feedback. I think that very often when you've got a team like that, you need to sit down with them and just have conversations with particular key people. If you can identify the subject matter experts and the ones who are maybe pointing people towards those subject matter experts as well, you can often find that there are certain key problems that they're dealing with, and they're dealing with that in that particular way. Now, the next step is convincing them that there's a better way to do it, which can be really, really challenging. And so, that's just something you've got to kind of keep on working at and encourage them. But if you can provide them with a tool that, again, doesn't provide too much friction, so it makes it very straightforward for them to share what they've got, and also give them an understanding of the fact that actually there's an opportunity for them here to contribute to the wider organization as a whole. And it might be that they've got something to say that they feel like other areas of the organization might really benefit from. So again, is there a way that you can kind of encourage them in that way and go, look, you're doing some good stuff here, but you're doing it in a way that no one else can benefit from it, and we really want to bring everyone together. Those are a couple of ways in which you can kind of have those conversations, but you've definitely got to start from the point of understanding what problems they're trying to solve, because if they're trying to solve different problems to you, then that's always going to end up with a failure, basically, because you're not going to be able to actually get to an agreement on it.
Yeah, no, definitely. So Deepak is asking, how does one ally the key competencies needs of an organization and drive it through the LXP?
So there's an emerging space at the moment, and there's a lot of debate going on around skills and whether or not a skills framework gives you a good way of measuring whether or not people know what they want to know. Ultimately, so skills are kind of just another form of competency framework, and they're kind of, it's looking at, I suppose it's looking at purely what you can do and what you know, whereas a competency framework is looking at what you can do and how you do it. So it's a little bit simpler to just look at skills. Most LXPs and the kind of area products in that area are focusing on that kind of an approach. But again, the problem with that is really knowing whether or not that skill conveys the same meaning to everyone within an organization. And so you could be in a place where what you understand to be a given skill is actually something very different to someone sat in London or another office location, or it could be whatever it might be. So all of these things have really got quite considerable drawbacks. It can be really challenging to do it. I think where I would kind of come back to is maybe take a step back and say, what are you looking to achieve from the competency frameworks? Because very often competencies are about values first and foremost, and values can be brought out of communities in a very meaningful way. If you've enabled conversation and dialogue, then you can talk about those values and you can get people behind them in a different approach. Otherwise, competencies will sometimes be, I've worked with defense contractors and all kinds of stuff where like a competency was literally, can I change a wheel on an aircraft? That's a very different kind of competency, but that's probably more aligned with the skills area, where you want to know, does someone have a given skill? And there's a number of platforms that will enable you to do that. That's something that we're working on at the moment, actually, and we've got a lot of internal conversation about exactly what we're doing and how we're doing it. But we'll be talking more about that in the coming months.
Fantastic. Those are the questions for now. I don't know if you've got anything else to add, Mark.
No, just lovely to talk to you all, and thank you all for the questions. They were really good questions.
Yes, really, really, really good questions. Thank you very much. Thank you again from the team. Thank you to Mark Warren from Thrive. And please, let's carry the conversation on. And there are many other events that are going on today. Thank you very much for coming to Learning Technologies Digital Experience. I don't have any other questions, so I'd like to say thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.